On this episode of Common Mystics, we are joined by the incredible Nicole Bigley of A Psychic's Story podcast to discuss our experiences and findings in the greater Cincinnati area. I'm Jennifer James.
I'm Jill Stanley.
We're psychics.
We're sisters.
We are common mystics. We find extraordinary stories in ordinary places. And today's story comes to you from Southgate, Kentucky.
Yay! Nicole, people are going to be really scared for you to think that we actually kept you.
Yeah, that I'm living in your little pockets.
She's safe, everyone.
I'm safe. I know. I lovingly said that they kidnapped me. I went along willingly and I'm back home safe and sound. But no, this was so fun. And I'm really excited to dive in.
Yay. Okay, let's get started. Jennifer.
Our listeners already know that we hooked up with Nicole in Cincinnati. We did a whole little walk around OTR and we found a bunch of stuff that we talked about in episode 83. But the fun didn't end there.
No, ma'am.
It sure did not.
We got in the car and we headed south.
Right. And of course, we still had set our intention for the day.
Do you want to remind everyone what our intention is?
Well, why not? We asked the spirits to lead us to a verifiable story previously unknown to us that allowed us to give voice to the voiceless.
That's right. And Nicole was coming up with some monster hits. Let's get right into it.
Yeah, so even before we were getting to the car, I know that we were leaving, well, it wasn't really leaving over the Rhine, but we were kind of done with the original story that we had uncovered before. We felt that. And so we were what I would call wrapping up. And Jen, you pointed out a church that was across the street and said, Jill.
It was Jill.
Said.
I answered to anything.
I know, well, because Jen was taking such meticulous notes. So Jill said, there's a church across the street that's of significance somehow. And so I just was kind of pausing and I saw multiple churches in my mind's eye. And then as we were walking towards the car, because we were parked over by Findlay Market area, which is one of the older markets in Ohio and one of the originals in Cincinnati. And I kept seeing tents, like makeshift tents and then churches and it felt like a place of refuge. And that was even before we got to the car. And then when we said, where are we headed? We said, let's go to the river.
So true.
So that was that. And then as we were crossing over, meaning over the Rhine and towards the river before we even got to the bridge, there was a building that I believe it was more like a trading building and it said stockyard. And I said, it doesn't feel like a stockyard with animals. I saw people being held. And then so Jen wrote that piece down. So I think that's what I had.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say the good people of Cincinnati, literally, we're in the parking lot outside of a popular farmer's market and Nicole is full on psychic, just walking around pointing to things and just people are walking by us as we're having this conversation about the things that are coming to us. Think about that for a second.
I didn't even really, I was just walking around like, whatever.
Yeah, we were not shy. We were like, and something over here and something over here. And those fine people of Cincinnati did not care. They had 0 Fs. They had no idea what was going on.
And somehow I always think I look the craziest because I'm the asshole with the notebook.
You're just like writing furiously down because there's 2 of us pointing like we're tour guides.
Right.
Oh, that's a good point.
So maybe they thought it was just a tour group.
It was
of
a psychic tour group.
What a sad tour group. The one person taking notes and like the 2 instructors. Oh, that's sad. I'm sorry. Jen, what were you picking up on?
Right around the time that Nicole was picking up on people as stock, I was also drawn to the Underground Railroad Museum as we were driving right over the Ohio River. I saw it and, like Jill, you like to say, something will come out at you in 3D. That's how the Underground Railroad Museum felt. And I just felt that whole feeling of enslaved people seeking freedom. People seeking refuge, in a very strong way. And so I wrote that down because it seemed like Nicole picking up on people as stock was kind of in the same area. So
what's interesting about that is that when we crossed over to Kentucky, I feel like the whole energy shift, it felt uneasy for some reason. It felt like there was more to be seen than what we were seeing.
I felt confused.
Like that too. Yeah.
Like disoriented. I didn't know where to go, what direction to go in.
Like vulnerable would be a good word. Yeah. Continue.
It was definitely a different energy. And I think that, Jill, you and I can talk in our detours about our experience on the street in Covington.
And Nicole.
And Nicole, if Nicole can join us, that'd be great.
If we can...
Sure.
Take you, Nicole. Take every bit of energy out of this girl.
Sure. Why not? I'm only going to see you guys this week too in person again.
I
anyway.
know. We're going to get more stories. That's my goal.
Okay. All right. Awesome. All right. Continue.
Sorry.
Okay. So we walked a little bit around a neighborhood in Covington, which was super bizarre, but we'll get into that later. And after we explored Covington, we drove into Newport. Now, Jill, we were seeking something specific.
We always look for the cemeteries. Whenever we're confused, we're always like, we need to find the cemetery. So off we went looking for the oldest cemetery we can find in the area.
And the closest.
And the closest.
And the closest.
Which we didn't know. We were saying, where is the cemetery? Let's just go there. But yes.
And remind me, Jill, did you look on your phone for the oldest cemetery? Is that how we knew where to go?
I don't remember. Did I look on my phone?
I don't remember
I
either.
always have CarPlay.
You did.
Did I?
Yeah, you looked up on your phone, and we both actually were, because Jen was taking the notes. And so
We're Jennifer.
she was in the backseat, and you took off, we were looking up cemetery, and you were Johnny on the spot and said, there's one right around the corner.
And I think it was called the Old Newport Cemetery.
Mm-hmm. That sounds
Yes.
right. That sounds right.
So we start driving, and
You know what's funny? We were looking for a cemetery, right?
Mhm.
And I'm pretty good with directions. Like, I can read a map. You know
well,
what I'm
can
saying?
Sniff out a cemetery like a hound.
Sniff out. I'm a cemetery hound. But we get to where the cemetery should be.
It's saying you have arrived.
Yeah, exactly. It's like destination ended. It's to your right. And instead of a cemetery, we see a school, like a grammar school, like a full-on modern day grammar school.
Well, it was an intermediate school.
What's the difference?
I don't have kids, so I can't say.
Yeah, me either.
It was a school.
It was
for
a
children.
school.
In my day, we only had one type of school. Just kidding. But yeah, it was a school. It wasn't a cemetery at all. It was literally a school. So that prompted more Google searches.
And I'm still looking around for the graves, thinking, well, maybe it's across the street. Google has it wrong. But yeah, no. So then I immediately get on my phone and start looking, and found this article, and it said, what, Jen?
It said that the Old Newport Cemetery had indeed been moved. It had been there at the location of where the school is now and had been moved. Yeah. And so as we were walking around the grounds, again, Nicole, you are so bold. I wasn't going to try to get into the grounds, but we found...
Jennifer was telling me not to try to break in, Nicole's like, hey, look, this is open. And we're like, all right.
Yeah. Well, first of all, in all fairness, when we parked in the parking lot, which was empty, and the parking lot was open, and we could have walked around through the parking lot to the playground.
True.
Okay. But we went to the front. So it was open. There was no breaking and entering. I didn't break any laws.
She didn't. But if
really,
you did, I would have been on board. If you did, I would have so been like, I guess we're breaking in now.
Yeah. But so we went to the side, and there was this gate, and I said, well, let's just see if it's open. And I just pushed right on through. And then the moment we did that, the energy just felt really off, because we were standing on the grounds looking at a school and a playground where children would play. And it felt very sad and hard and spooky. And also knowing that it used to be a cemetery, just looking out at the thing, it was very surreal for me, because in my mind's eye, I could then see it as a cemetery from back in the day and not as a school. So it felt very surreal to me.
Well, there is this like large circle planter, I guess. I don't know. But I remember sitting, looking at the front doors to the school, feeling like it just shouldn't be there. Like, I was looking at this building and I'm like, this isn't right. Like, I'm looking at it and it just felt so wrong to have it be there.
And I think all three of us felt really strongly that there were still graves left behind, that there were human remains.
1,000%.
Yeah, buried under the playground, under the parking lot, that they were still there and they hadn't been moved.
Well, this was the first time I'd actually, those apps on your phone where you can put your phone up and see the sky and see the stars and see everything kind of mapped.
Yeah.
And you can also point it down to the ground and see what the stars are on the other side of the earth.
I did not know that.
Yeah. When I looked down at my feet, I saw bones, and I saw like almost kind of as if it was an X-ray. And that's what I said, the creep factor really set in. And then when I looked at the building, I saw brick by brick and then bones inside the brick too.
I don't know how you sleep at night, because that is chilling. That's like my worst fear to see, like, because of the movie The Changeling when I was a kid, the little boy coming out of the ground. That is like my worst fear.
They're not allowed to come to me in my sleep. But anyway, so that's what I saw.
And while we were there, that's when you were describing to me the soldiers.
Yeah. So when you were looking, Jill, at the building, and you were taking a lot of time and just like, this is not right. That's what you just kept saying. This is not right. This is not right. Think about the poor children that are there and the kids, and they have this it felt very oppressive energy. Mm-hmm. And I think because, again, we were all sensing that people hadn't been respected in their graves, had just been literally built over. It was a parking lot. Mm-hmm. That, I think, if anything, it's not even a building. It's this building and then this parking lot just paved over. Mm-hmm. No regard whatsoever. But that said, as we were leaving, because you guys were like, we're done, let's get in the car, I went to turn, and right up on the top of the building, I saw a huge line of soldiers. We talked about this a little bit in the last episode, just in a row looking down, and they all looked really solemn and very serious. And then they were just standing there. And that was, I was like, okay, they're soldiers here. Interesting. And I felt like it was the Civil War time, mm-hmm. but I wasn't really sure because the uniforms, they were not all matching, and they didn't look like necessarily the uniforms that I have seen in the history books.
When you were describing that, in my mind's eye, as you were describing it, it felt like a castle you were describing, because you were describing people on top of the mm-hmm. building lining up. So in my mind's eye, I was thinking castle.
Yeah. And it's that's why the hit was a little bit interesting, because I didn't feel like they were defending. They were, because they were in line. There was a purpose of them being in line, but they were looking very solemn, like there was a seriousness of a defense, and that there was a barrier between me and the school, essentially, i.e. maybe even the river. I don't know.
Wow.
Jeez. So Jen, what do we know about the old Newport Cemetery? Because that is just, now the school. What do we know about the school that's on top of the old Newport Cemetery?
While we were there, we actually got our phones out because we could not help it.
No one can blame us for that. Like, legit.
We learned that the old Newport Cemetery had operated on that location, but not very long, only from 1820 to 1848.
That's long enough to leave the bodies there.
After that time, many of the early burials were relocated to another cemetery outside of town known as Evergreen Cemetery in Southgate, Kentucky. And when the school, which was at first a high school, was built on that old cemetery site in 1872, human remains were found, i.e., they forgot some bones.
But then in 1872, they got all of the bones out, and that mistake would not happen again.
Well, actually, in the 1990s, there was an addition built onto the present building, and again, human remains were uncovered. Yeah. Suffice to say, our impressions were correct, in my opinion, and still there are graves there. But the thing that we felt then, knowing this, is we had to go to the Evergreen Cemetery. It wasn't even a discussion. We were all like, well, we're going to the Evergreen Cemetery now.
Because we said, where did they go? We felt drawn energetically.
Yes, we sure did.
So then we get in the car.
And we went to the Evergreen Cemetery in Southgate, Kentucky. And yeah, do you remember what happened when we first got there?
Nicole was like, make a left. I remember that. So
Jill said, go to the right. Jill said, go right. And I said, no, left.
And I was like, she's a guest. So stupid.
And since my kidnappers are very, supportive, they took me to the left.
And what did we find? This is crazy.
First thing, graves, obviously, because we're in a cemetery, but they were Civil War graves from soldiers.
And they were all
lined up in a row.
Lined up.
Row after row.
This massive cemetery, too. This wasn't just, you could have gone in different directions, like Jill said, right or left, but also I think there was even a forward kind of path. And we're like, as soon as we got there, where do we go? Which direction? And so it took us right there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I do want to call one other thing out just real quick.
Please.
Is that when we were looking at the Civil War soldiers' gravestones, They also had loved ones. Like some of them, the women, remember we said that was really unique, that their wives, some of them were also buried alongside them. But that stood out, I think, too, based on what we're going to talk about here.
Okay. I think that's a good point. So we're standing at these soldiers' graves looking at the Civil War soldiers. While we were standing there, Jen was taking notes and I turned my back to the graves and I was looking in the opposite direction. And it felt to me like it was a movie set, literally. It's a very pretty cemetery. And if it wasn't a movie set, I feel like someone from Hollywood should scout that area out.
Yeah, I remember you saying you felt movie set, you felt Hollywood, and I didn't write that down. That actually didn't get into the notes, but I remembered
Only because you think I'm dramatic anyway. And she was like, oh, she's feeling Hollywood?
True.
Oh, are you? Again?
But then before we left Evergreen, Jill, you hit on something else that ended up being really pivotal.
Poor people's unmarked graves. So like a potter's field, pauper's field. Is that right?
Right. And so at that point, we were done with our adventure for the day. But going into the research, there were some questions that I know I was driven by. And some of them were, who were the soldiers that Nicole was seeing? And why did they come to Nicole when we were at the old Newport Cemetery location, which is now the school? And why did they lead us to Evergreen Cemetery? So I did some research on Evergreen Cemetery. I started there.
You're like a detective. What'd you find?
I found that Evergreen Cemetery, located in Southgate, Kentucky, is actually the largest cemetery in Campbell County. And actually, Evergreen is known to keep meticulous records of the people buried there. In fact, the very first man buried there the first person buried at Evergreen was a man named John M. Howe. And he was buried at the, quote, new Evergreen Cemetery in 1849 after the old Newport Cemetery closed, right? So his was the very first new grave buried there. Other early plots had been moved from that older cemetery in Newport to Evergreen.
Not only is this a cemetery that has meticulous notes, but it also had like a walking tour, if I'm correct, that you can walk to different locations around the cemetery and there would be historical markers explaining whose grave you're looking at.
Yeah, it was after we were ready to leave. We were like, let's get out of here because it had just been a lot. But we noticed, yes, exactly that.
Right. And that's because there are a lot of very notable people that are buried in that cemetery.
Like who?
David Leach, who developed the first settlement in Campbell County along the Licking River at
the Licking River. My goodness.
That's what it says.
What are they doing down there in Kentucky? You have Big Bone Lick, the Licking River. Jesus.
Yeah, I wasn't born in Kentucky. I was born in Ohio. So, you know.
James Taylor and his wife were the founders of Newport. They are both buried there, as well as many influential business people and culturally important people from northern Kentucky are also buried there. And so, yes, Evergreen has very meticulous records, and there are a lot of famous and important people that are buried at Evergreen.
Okay.
But Evergreen's also famous for another reason, Jill.
Why?
Are you sitting down?
Yes.
Remember when you were talking about sensing a movie scene?
Yeah, it's a pretty cemetery.
Do you remember the movie Rain Man with Tom Cruise, 1988?
And want to watch Wapner.
Exactly. Parts of Rain Man, there's a scene in Rain Man that was filmed at Evergreen.
That's crazy.
It literally was a movie set.
I love that movie. Do you know that movie, Nicole?
Of course.
Yeah. It's amazing.
I don't remember that scene.
Are you impressed with yourself?
No.
Oh,
I'm
Lord.
confused because I'm trying to think of the scene. But yeah, I'm all right.
Well, I'm impressed.
I'm impressed.
But
I'll take it.
Perhaps most significantly, there is a very important structure located inside Evergreen Cemetery, and that is known as the Shaler Battery.
Okay, so stop a second. Can you describe what a battery is for me? Because I'm thinking Energizer. I'm thinking bunny.
Okay, no, not that kind of battery. A battery is an earthwork fortification that's built on a hill. And there were 28 batteries built in northern Kentucky during the Civil War. Located on a hill at the highest point in Evergreen is the Shaler Battery, and it was built to protect Cincinnati from Confederate soldiers during the Civil War.
Oh.
And Union soldiers camped out on the high ground at the battery could then spot the Confederate forces moving in from the south.
It was really hilly, is really hilly.
Yes,
I mean,
is.
to the point where I was wondering why build a cemetery on this because it is so jagged, essentially.
To the point when you were looking and were walking down by the Civil War soldiers, I was worried about you. I was. Because you had your heels on.
There were geese.
Yeah. Yeah, you had those cute shoes on.
But it was also really steep.
It was.
Mm-hmm. It was. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could have rolled down and
attacked by geese.
Jen and Jill took me out. Took me out, not the geese.
A whole host of mishaps could have befallen Nicole. And she was in our care.
I know, she was in our care. Well, I'm glad that didn't happen.
Exactly. We got her out safe. So the battery was named for Dr. Nathaniel Berger Shaler, who was a prominent physician from Newport, whose estate once bordered the cemetery, and he offered his family's hilltop vineyard as a site for the battery. The Shaler family estate would later be purchased by the cemetery, and now the cemetery encompasses the whole thing. If you go to Evergreen, now we did not explore this, but a portion of the Shaler earthwork still is there, as well as a part of the earthen ramp and some drainage ditches that were dug in 1862. And the rifle pits were filled in to form a road, which is now paved.
The rifle pits, in my head, it's like a ditch where people are laying.
Yes.
And on their bellies.
Right, for safety. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so they would dig in and then the guns would be higher.
Like a trench.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Oh, my.
Yes, isn't that incredible?
So much history.
But there are more questions. So at this point, I was wondering, why were the batteries needed in northern Kentucky? And when exactly were they built? Especially because we had been talking about the fact that Cincinnati was never part of the Civil War in terms of battles, right?
A battle. Yeah, exactly.
So I did some research.
What'd you find?
I found this event that's actually called the Defense of Cincinnati, and it occurred during the Civil War. I had never heard of it. Have you?
I haven't. Nicole,
had you?
I heard it very briefly at some point in history class, and with my family being from here, I knew that Cincinnati had played a significant role in defending itself, but I didn't know the intricacies or the ins and outs of what happened.
Well, let me tell you what I found out.
Please do.
The defense of Cincinnati occurred during the Kentucky campaign of the American Civil War in September of 1862. When Union forces were defeated at the Battle of Richmond on August 30th, 1862, the route to Ohio was opened up for the Confederate forces, and they looked to move north to flex their power.
So they were feeling themselves, and they're like, we're headed north.
Exactly. So Confederate General Henry Heth was sent north from Lexington, Kentucky to threaten Cincinnati, Ohio, which was then the sixth largest city in the United States. Now, Heth was never planning to attack the city per se, but he was instead told to go there and make a demonstration.
How do you make a demonstration if you're in war? I mean, just, hi, I'm here and just show up?
That's a good point.
I guess that would be scary if the army suddenly showed up.
If I think modern day warfare, I think something similar would be North Korea, pivoting their missiles. You know what I mean? That's how it feels like. It's
I got big guns.
Yes. That's how it feels. It's like a big old, I'm here. What? Like that kind of energy.
Scare them. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Maybe they just came to town and walked up and down the streets and were rude to people. Do you know what I mean? Hey.
But they just show their sheer force. I don't know. It sounds like not very good strategy and move to just show up and let everybody know how many people you have in your army. But
that's
who
a
am
good
I?
point.
I'm not a wartime general. Thank God.
What I know about Cincinnati, just from our last episode, is that those people do not give a fuck. They'll be like, "What?
True.
You want what? Okay, you're here, so are we. Let's do this." That's how that seems to me.
In Cincinnati, they found out that basically the Confederate army is coming. And so the mayor ordered all the businesses closed. And the Union general, General Lew Wallace, declared martial law, which is basically a temporary rule in times of war. So now all of like the laws of the land, you can forget about it. Like all your civil liberties and everything, that's all on hold because the army's coming and now the general's in charge.
It's martial law, which is why we have our guns. Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly.
I was thinking so we can drink on Sunday. That's where my mind went.
He shut down all the businesses, including the bars, Jill.
He wouldn't.
So the riots wouldn't happen again.
So not only that, the military seized 16 steamboats and armed them on the Ohio River. And the citizens of Cincinnati, Covington, and Newport, Kentucky organized to take part in the defense of Cincinnati. Okay?
Nice.
So shit's happening now.
Yeah, because if they're coming from the south up north and they're going to hit and they're going through Lexington and they hit Covington and Newport, they essentially is an extension of Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. And they're like, we don't want you to blow through our towns in order to try and get to Cincinnati because we are an extension of that. So they're protecting their land as well.
Exactly.
I can see that.
Hang in there, guys. We'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. We are so excited to unveil the first book in our series entitled Common Mystics Present Ghost on the Road Volume 1, Murders and Mysterious Deaths.
It's everything you love about common mystics and more.
It's a retelling of 10 of our favorite stories from our pod with exciting extras.
Extras like souvenirs, what we took away from the experience, and what to know if you go if you decide to travel in our footsteps.
Pre-order the Kindle edition now. All other formats of the book will be available for purchase at Amazon.com on July 1st, 2023.
Thanks, guys. Now back to the show.
And so that's when fortifications, namely 28 batteries, were built far enough away from Cincinnati that if the Confederates got to the batteries, they couldn't reach Cincinnati with their guns and they couldn't shell the city. So the batteries were defended by 25,000 Union Army soldiers and 45,000 local militia volunteers and 15,000 squirrel hunters. That's in quotes, squirrel hunters.
That is
That's a lot.
A lot.
That makes me so happy. That's so cute.
What's a squirrel hunter?
Someone who's hunting squirrels.
Well, they were untrained volunteers who basically didn't have like good equipment. They just used their squirrel hunting guns.
Rude.
Well, they're still helping.
That's rude to squirrel hunters because they're saying that squirrel hunting isn't like a real hunting thing.
Okay.
It's rude.
It's not.
They can be wily.
Poor squirrels.
That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people who helped organize this defense of Cincinnati. So Confederate General Heth and his men marched from Lexington, Kentucky on the Lexington Turnpike, which is Route 25 today. General Heth and his men arrived south of Covington on September 6th. But they found all the defenses and all the fortifications and pretty much said this attack is pointless. There's no reason to even try to get to Cincinnati. It's just too much trouble with all of these fortifications.
Attack? I thought he was going to make a demonstration.
Right. Well, it was just pointless to even try to get past it. And so his forces stayed just a couple days and engaged in just a few insignificant skirmishes. And then they turned around and returned to Lexington on September 12th.
And, you know, this is the second time I'm hearing that Cincinnati showed up, was all like, what? And then they're like, no, never mind, I'm leaving. From last week's story and now this story.
Yeah, true. Mm-hmm.
So I still had more questions at this point.
What questions did you have?
Well, I wanted to know who built the batteries that saved Cincinnati from the Confederates.
Who did?
You're not going to believe this. Maybe you are.
I bet you I will. I'm reading it.
Have you ever heard of the Black Brigade?
No.
I have not.
Neither had I. The Black Brigade of Cincinnati was a group of free African Americans organized in 1862 to participate in the defense of Cincinnati. So 706 members of the Black Brigade built fortifications in Kentucky to protect Cincinnati. They had no weapons and only had a few cavalry scouts between them and the Confederate troops. Because if you think about it, the people who are building these fortifications, they're out in enemy territory.
That's a good point.
And so how long, and you may not know this, but how long from when they got word that, hey, somebody's coming up? Because again, they're walking,
Yeah.
from Lexington up. So how long did they have to scramble and to build this?
Because the army decided to come on August 30th. So it was the 1st of September that they started marching north, and that the North got word that they were coming. So we're talking days. And he arrived on the 6th, if you remember.
Wow.
Yeah. So
and they
this
built
is a quick turnaround.
28.
Huh?
28 different batteries, 28 different
28
locations.
batteries on the south
In
side of the
6
Ohio
days.
River opposite Cincinnati to defend Cincinnati.
God.
So what you need to know, though, is that, in my mind, it's so simple. And I get caught in this thinking that Ohio is free, Black people are happy there. Black people are free. And south of the river, there's slavery. Black people are sad. You know what I mean? Like it's so simple in my brain, and it's not so simple in real life.
In all fairness, it was taught to us very simple, very black and white.
Right.
So this work, we're learning a lot about the gray areas in American history.
Exactly. And so Cincinnati being in Ohio, a free state, it was a little surprising to me at first that race relations in Cincinnati at the time were incredibly volatile. So being right across the river from Kentucky, some people in Ohio were aggressively barring Black people from migrating to the state. The intensity of those sentiments rose to the point of destruction of property, killing, and mob violence against Black people since about the 1830s. So much so that American abolitionist and speaker Peter H. Clark stated about Cincinnati, quote, "Nowhere has the prejudice against colored people been more cruelly manifested than here."
Wow. Just because it was the North and it was a free state wasn't free, which is also why I felt stockyard and people as stock and still looked at as a commodity.
Exactly.
Again, what's triggering me from this statement is that the people of Cincinnati, once again, have zero fucks to give. They are rioting. They are being aggressive with violence to use their strength in numbers to prevent what they don't want to happen.
The other interesting thing that I found through my research is that some of the biggest antagonists towards this racial aggression towards the Black free people in Cincinnati were the Irish, because the Irish had moved into Cincinnati, and when the free Black people were coming over the river, they were taking the jobs from the Irish.
And also what's sick about that whole thing is that the Black people that were coming in and having those jobs wasn't because they were getting equal pay. They're probably getting next to nothing. And that's what the conflict was.
Can you imagine going through the Underground Railroad and making it over or through the Ohio River to be like, I'm safe, just to have some asshole be like, that would suck. Sorry.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah. And there were straight up race riots where they would go into the Black neighborhoods and pull people out of their houses and just really terrorize entire neighborhoods just to flex and put them in their place. Anyway, so fast forward, August 1862. The imminent threat of a Confederate attack is upon the city of Cincinnati, and Black Cincinnatians met to organize a home guard and offer their services to defend the Union cause in defense of the city.
Aww.
Now, hearing that they were meeting to discuss providing service during the war, many people tried to shut down the meeting and intimidate them.
For wanting to help?
Yes, they were told it's a white man's war. We don't need your help. Stop organizing.
Well, heck yeah, because they want to solidify their freedom, what little freedom they have at that moment in time. It's their fight too.
Of course. By September 1st, 1862, Cincinnati was bracing itself from an attack from the South, and the Union Army regiments from Ohio Indiana, and other northern states were ordered to the Cincinnati area to defend it from the advancing Confederate Army. General Wallace, who had placed the city under martial law, assumed command of the city, and the mayor asked for all the men to assist in the defense of the city. And the police force was placed under Wallace's command to act as kind of a provost guard, or in other words, military police or marshals, right? So now the police are under order. Now you work for the military, organize this defense. So what did they do? On September 2nd, 1862, the Cincinnati police roughly and abruptly rounded up black male residents at gunpoint without a plan, without any explanation. They arrested all the black men they could find from the streets, from their workplaces, from their homes. These people were given no explanation whatsoever about where they were going or why they were being rounded up. They were put in a mule pen on Plum Street.
Jesus.
They were taken then across the river and forced into a camp without the opportunity to prepare for camp life. A lot of them were afraid that they were being taken to Kentucky to become enslaved. They had no idea what was happening.
Especially after they said, I want to help, and then they were told no, and then they're rounded up by gunpoint and put in a camp.
Right. About 400 men, 400 men were taken to camps and were held there for 2 days, where they worked continuously for 36 hours without sleep and received half rations of food.
You said that they worked continuously for 36 hours without sleep. So what were they working on?
They were forced to work as camp cooks, as laundrymen for the Union troops, and as servants.
Okay.
Now, General Wallace, remember the guy in charge? The Union general?
Martial law. Yeah, got it.
He finds out about this mistreatment, and he's immediately alarmed. He is pissed that it happened.
Yes.
He puts a man named Colonel Dixon in charge. And Colonel Dixon let the seized men return home. He's like, everybody's free, go back home. And he announced that there's going to be a new call for volunteers, for black volunteers. Right now, just go home to your families, regroup.
What an emotional roller coaster I'm on right now.
So Dixon says, we're going to do a call for all black volunteer men who want to help this cause. Okay. In the meantime, all the police, they were fired for their military duty.
Oh, wow. Action was actually taken.
Yeah. And then the police promised not to arrest any more black men except for criminal activity, whatever. Jeez. And so then the black men who managed not to be arrested by the police, they had escaped to the country and were being hidden secretly so that they wouldn't be rounded up. Now they came back home.
Oh my God.
At 5 a.m. on September 5th, the call goes out for volunteers. And I almost want to cry right now because 706 volunteers reported for duty and were put to work. Many of the men were from Cincinnati, but others came from other areas of southern Ohio. And with Colonel Dixon in charge, the soldiers of the Black Brigade received their own military flag and $13 a month, which was the same as a Union Army's private pay, along with other various privileges, including the right to visit their families.
I never heard of William M. Dixon before, but I'm literally going to look him up because that is something. That's some Glory type shit.
Yeah, really.
The movie Glory, that is some Glory type shit right here.
Speaking of a movie set, Hollywood telling. Hollywood.
That should be my stage name.
Hollywood is your stage name? So they built a bridge and they brought the Black Brigade into northern Kentucky, and they commenced the work that consisted of digging the rifle pits, clearing the trees, building the forts, magazines, and roads. And they conducted work almost a mile in front of the lines. Once they were nearly mistaken for Confederate soldiers and attacked due to how far away they were from the Union troops.
Oh my God, I just got chills from that.
It's like these poor people. My God, they're rounded up. They're let go.
Freedom. I want my freedom. I'm working. Leave me alone here. Holy shit.
My God, there is not enough Xanax and sage and lavender in the world to get me through this week in just September of 1862 in Cincinnati.
So they dug the trenches, they built the batteries, and they continued to work until September 20th, long after General Heth and his 8,000 soldiers had already reached the fortifications and then withdrew back to Louisville. And there was no longer a threat to Cincinnati, and they were released from their duty.
Question. The gentleman that came up from Louisville to be like, what? You want to fight? What?
General Heth?
Yeah. He was like, oh man, they're like way too legit
Exactly.
organized, so I'm out.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's like,
Okay.
they are way too well defended.
I wonder what they saw. So how many did Heth have? And then how many again?
8,000.
And they saw the batteries, but that was defended by the 25,000 Union Army soldiers, 45,000
Yes.
local militia volunteers,
Yes.
and the 15,000 squirrel hunters.
Exactly.
I will say this, the Black Brigade was a mile ahead of all those other people making this
Fortifications.
infrastructure.
Mhm.
Yes. So that's crazy.
They were literally the first line of defense, i.e. that line that we saw.
Exactly. Yes. Ooh, Nicole, look at you. When they were relieved of their duty on September 20th, they presented Dixon with an engraved sword that was engraved by the members of the brigade. They were so thankful to him.
God.
And he thanked them by saying, and I quote, "You have labored cheerfully and effectively. Go to your homes with a consciousness of having performed your duty and bearing with you the gratitude and respect of all honorable men."
I got goosebumps.
There is such a legacy here because, you guys, the Black Brigade of Cincinnati was the very first organization of African Americans to be used for military purposes by the North during the American Civil War. You mentioned Glory. That was the Massachusetts 54th. That came after this
Wow.
I don't even know how you know that.
because I did the
How is
research.
that in your brain?
Because I did the research.
She's a teacher and she did the research. She's
That's a
good.
good point. Good point.
That's amazing.
It is.
I didn't read the outline down here. I see. Now I get it.
You get it?
Uh-huh.
In 2012, finally, a resolution was passed within the U.S. Senate recognizing the members of the Cincinnati Black Brigade as veterans.
You just said 2012.
2012, because here's the thing. This first group of men, they were never given weapons. They were never meant to fight. And so the question of are they veterans or not was something that people discussed and probably argued about for over 100 years.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so finally they were designated as veterans in 2012.
So it happened late, but at least it happened, thankfully.
At least it happened. So after all of this, I still had another question.
What the heck was the connection to all of this? Mm-hmm.
Yes. What's the connection between the Black Brigade and Evergreen Cemetery? Here's the thing. In times of war, people don't always stop and write things down, like who's working where, right?
They don't have a Jennifer like we did.
And also, like we know from the Cincinnati riots, that shit was burned to the ground.
Good point.
But personally, psychically, I believe that the Black Brigade built the Shaler Battery located in Evergreen Cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole, intuitively, do you feel as if the Shaler Battery was fabricated by the Black Brigade?
Well, first of all, when we were in Over the Rhine and I felt the Civil War and I didn't understand because there was nothing battled within the city, when we went to the cemetery and we were overlooking, I felt like it was a really good fortification because it did feel strategic. It was so hilly. It was so whatever. We didn't know, but we were drawn to those headstones. And as you guys have been talking about it, I would say yes. I think that they did build it. Think about how fast they had to build that. You're not going to stop, as Jen said, and write all of that stuff down. You're just trying to live and defend the city and the lives of those around you. So I would say yes.
Jilly, what do you think?
I agree. And even when Nicole was talking just now, it felt like a storm was coming. Like everyone was all hands on deck to do what they could to make sure that the city was going to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really shitty is that the police officers just wasted a lot of time rounding up men instead of just asking people.
Which they, again, were already ready to support.
Exactly.
And were told not and then rounded up. I had that thought too earlier. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's messed up.
Despite the meticulous records that I mentioned that Evergreen Cemetery had kept over the years, and despite those neat rows of headstones marking the graves of the white soldiers, the graves of African American veterans are hard to find at Evergreen.
No, those brave men who fought with valor and who put their lives on the line to build an infrastructure to defend the city.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know where they are.
We don't know where they are.
I have it. I have it. The very first photo I took when we got to the cemetery was of a man, I sent this to you guys, named William Horsfall, who ran away from home and became a drummer in the Civil War. He hitched a ride on the steamship Annie Laurie, which was docked in Newport. When he was just 15, he received the Medal of Honor for saving the life of a high-ranking Union officer at the Siege of Corinth. He served in the Army until March of 1866 and lived the rest of his life in Newport. And that is a sign that they have. And I didn't understand why there was such significance around these graves and feeling really defeated. Like, not to take away what he did to save a life of a high-ranking officer, but there was such significance around that sign and it just felt flat and I felt defeated.
And why do you think that is in hindsight?
Because if you're saying that there's unmarked graves and they don't know where they are, and also their wives, some of their wives, the white soldiers' wives were buried next to them, which you guys even said, that's really odd. You have white people giving a valor and honor and significance and their gravestones marked. And what's really interesting to me is when I looked up at the school and saw those officers or those people standing in line, remember I said that it wasn't the Union or the Confederate.
Yeah, the uniforms.
The uniforms.
Yes.
And I couldn't see the faces. It was like there wasn't skin color. There wasn't, it was just more, it was about them standing in line and then that being more of that fortification.
So the neat rows of soldiers, like you had said just now, those aren't where the Black veterans are. Those are reserved for the white soldiers and their wives and their families with them. The Black soldiers, many of them, we don't know where they are because there was one section of the Evergreen Cemetery that was reserved for the Black people. And that portion hadn't been kept up over the years and records weren't good in that section. And now the headstones, many of them are unreadable, and I bet many are gone.
Jen, when you guys were just talking, it reminded me of the metaphor that Jen was alluding to earlier, that we were looking at graves, but without an indication that there was graves.
Yes, when we were standing at the site of the old Newport Cemetery, knowing there are graves beneath us, but not being able to see them and not being able to locate them.
It was a metaphor.
It was 100% a metaphor for standing in Evergreen and knowing that there are soldiers. I say soldiers, they're veterans there, veterans of the Black Brigade, and no one knows where they are, and they're gone.
And they played such a significant part in the defense of saving lives and saving a city, and not even knowing where they are.
You know, it's really easy to love a country that, like, for me to love America. My mom, like, we're first generation Americans, like our dad's was like American mutt, whatever. But it takes a special kind of love for a country and a special kind of person to have the bravery to stand in a line to defend a country that
treats you like shit.
Yeah. That enslaves your ass, that doesn't see the majority of the people around you, don't see your humanity, so much so that earlier that week, your ass was rounded up, right? So to think of that, to think of those people that came out of hiding after they've been so poorly treated their entire lives to defend a country that they believed in the promise of, not even had evidence of, but believed in the promise of. And I think that's the best idea of an American to me. And I really want to know where their flag was or how it looked, at least, because they had their own flag.
So Jill, your hit of the Potter's Field and the Pauper's Graves, that was just incredible. Without that, I don't know that we would have landed on this story. Seriously, that's incredible. But there are so many other hits. Should we talk about them?
Yeah.
Being drawn to the Ohio River, crossing into Kentucky, the makeshift tents as shelter. Now that you've explained fully the story, what I'm getting is when you said that there were men that were in hiding, maybe there was shelter from the church's shelter from that perspective, whatever that looked like. Maybe they were even in the land hiding literally from that perspective. And the stock, people and products, people with stock, that really stuck out as well. And then, of course, on the school, seeing the soldiers.
Right. Oh. And then the whole Underground Railroad and feeling, that strong sense of people seeking freedom. Even after they got to Cincinnati, they were still seeking freedom in a sense. That's all I got.
That was a lot.
That is a lot to digest. I
like a lot in a good way. And thank you for doing that in such short notice too.
Oh, you're welcome.
When I think of this story, there's so many things that stick out for me. I want to know more about General Dixon because I think he's an amazing man. I love his quote that you have labored cheerfully and effectively to go to your homes with the consciousness of having performed your duty and bearing with you the gratitude and respect of all honorable men. That that should be engraved into something. Truly. Yeah. I love that.
And the fact that there was respect given both ways, too, that they were honoring him with a sword. And then he said that. He's like, no, the honor is all mine. You served bravely.
My goodness.
And how much pressure for these men knowing that they're the first. Like, this has never happened before. We are the first. We can't fuck this up. Like, that's a lot of pressure. Like, generations down the line, it all depends on this. Wow.
Well, and they're the first one at the line. Yes. They're the first line of defense that the Southerners were seeing.
I can't even imagine the valor and the strength of character.
That story needs to be told.
Yeah, no, for sure. And this is what I wanted to say. When we do this work, it's really it's gratifying when we're in the field and to understand our hits. But it's those moments that we're in like a cloud of confusion, just like in this story, that we have absolutely no direction to go. And to find a story that makes sense about all these hits and the locations that we actually were is absolutely incredible. It makes no sense. If we weren't I don't understand how this would happen if it wasn't from spirit.
Right.
Because to me, it's so clear in hindsight. It's insane.
Well, it was just phenomenal to see. I was drawn obviously to your podcast, didn't know you from Adam, listened obsessively, reached out, you were on mine, and then was extremely honored that you would have me be part of it to see how you worked in the field and then also the research and having the conversation and it come full circle. And it is so cool to see how even as we're conversing here, we're receiving information from spirit. It wasn't just on the ground and it wasn't just in through the research, but just how everything, like you said, Jill, comes full circle and those pieces of the puzzle fit.
Exactly. More on detours.
Thank you so much for joining us, Nicole. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Well, I love you so much. Can you please plug all the wonderful things that you're doing?
Yeah. So A Psychic Story, apsychicstory.com. The podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. And also the book, Looking for Angels, will be available on 11/11. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you. And for more of your favorite mystics, check out commonmystics.net. Email us at commonmystics@gmail.com. Follow us on the socials at Common Mystics Podcast. And remember to like, download, and follow. Please share. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.